All right, I think that we can get started. So thank you so much for joining. My name is Marcus. I'm a qualitative insight consultant here in Ipsos and the practice lead for our digital qualitative solutions in our Danish team. And I'm super happy to be hosting this webinar together with RJ. Can you say a few words about yourself, RJ?
Good morning. My name is Ajay, and I am the Chief Innovation Officer with Ipsos Qualitative. I'm based in Malaysia, and it's a wonderfully toasty evening here. It's 4 p.m. here.
And how are you doing today, RJ?
Oh, amazing. It's always sunny in Malaysia, so it's 365 days of summer.
Wow, I think we could get a lot more summer in Denmark. But again, it is a sunny morning here anyway, so no reason to complain. I'm sitting here enjoying a cup of coffee in my Ipsos mug, which does look a little like product placement, but this is actually something I was awarded for in a charity event, so no product placement here. Um, but today we'll have quite a lot of interesting things to cover. But before we go into the agenda, I would like to start by talking a little bit about who we are in Ipsos UU and what we do. So UU stands for Understanding Unlimited, and we are the qualitative service line here in Ipsos. We are actually the largest qualitative research network in the world with more than 1,200 experts in more than 80 markets. And this gives us a truly unique position and a global scale with local expertise. And you might not know this, but UU is actually the most innovative qualitative agency in the world, nominated by the Grid Report this year. And in recent years, we have received a lot of prestigious awards for our research papers on AI in qualitative research. And luckily for us, we have one of the authors here today, and that is RJ. So thank you so much for joining me. We are also partnering with major universities on our AI efforts, and this is really giving us a lot of good input in terms of both the academic side of things and also the practical side of market research. And of course, today we are here to talk about how we consider the balance of AI and human intelligence in qualitative research and the impact that it can have for businesses. And one of the more emerging areas where it's natural to consider the balance, that is with AI-moderated interviews. And the use of AI in Qual is something we spend a lot of time on researching and innovating. That is also clear from all the papers that we are making. And there's so much happening. So today we are here to let you in a little bit on where we are in Ipsos right now. So we'll be sharing our point of view on the impact of co-moderator bots. We will share some use cases and examples and some of the findings that we have from our research on using mod bots. And at the end, we'll go through some questions. So what you will see here in the webinar is you have this question mark symbol where you can post questions throughout. And then towards the end, we'll summarize and then do the questions. So please post them whenever you feel like it, and then we'll do them at the end. But I think before we go into the modbots, I think it's essential that we start to talk a little bit about the impact of deep qualitative insights, because this is essentially the starting point for being able to consider how we deploy AI wisely. So let's start with this quote here from a recent Harvard Business Review paper on how organizations use AI in their innovation work. So AI can make organizations faster overnight, but leaders must ensure it does not make them shallower over time. And this is not meant as a means to slow down AI adoption, but rather to remind us of what we need as business, which is sustained competitive advantages. So being shallow or empty is, of course, not a good thing for any business function, but being empty in terms of deep and nuanced insight is a real danger, because this is where brands must find the foundations for their creatives, for product and service innovations. You know, those unique things that can help differentiate in increasingly competitive markets. And that's why I think we need to reflect on the core purpose of qualitative research and why we do it, to truly understand what the possibilities of AI are. So what do we do in Ipsos UU is that we champion the value of deep insight and real human understanding. We do this to fuel growth for our clients and deliver insights that businesses can make, help to make products and services more relevant to their consumers. And we explore the why behind motivations of behavior and behaviors of consumers to provide that true understanding for their needs. We are storytellers and we are experts at bringing insights to life with contextual examples that will live in organizations. And then we know that no matter the industry and no matter the market that we are in, true empathy with your target audience, that is the key driver for success. And we help our clients capture this and turn it into actions. And how do we do this? So we strongly believe in exploring the fringes and finding new business territories through immersion and exploration of markets and consumers. So we focus on discovery, new opportunities, and we look for those fringes that can give your brands the edge. Now, turning to some of the implications of AI here in the innovation pipeline, we know that more and more people in organizations can access more and more data than ever before, and it gives us opportunities, but it also comes with new challenges and dilemmas. Because on its own, large amounts of data do not give direction and true insight. A challenge is to find this in the oceans of data that we have. And in doing so, in our pursuit of insight and with the increased amount of AI tools at hand, there is a real danger of too often shortcutting to the average. And I think most of us know that feeling of lacking the magical angle and the tension that inspire us to think about new solutions in our work. So going fast all the time can dull our appetite for serendipity and also our appetite for discovery and insight. Taking some time to be truly explorative early on in the insight pipeline can actually help us go faster later on, because then we have identified new ground that are truly emerging and something to build from. If you consider organizations today, most of organizations globally are using AI and also AI in the innovation pipeline work. But if everyone feeds the same tools with the same trends, how do we then create something that's different? If we look at cars, for instance, the result here is that we see increased homogeneity. Here we see a year-by-year color map of cars, and it's clear that it is becoming increasingly monotone with grayscale colors really booming in recent years. And it's not just with cars. We also see a trend of homogeneity in luxury brand logos, a tendency that can be referred to as blanding. Here we see a shift away from more heritage-rich and unique logo designs to more standardized fonts that signal modernity and a clean look. But if we think about the consumer point of view, what does this bring to the consumers? Is it helping them make their decisions, or is it creating a sea of sameness? To avoid growing shallow in our insight pipeline, we need to sustain our human skill sets. And that is curiosity, creativity, our ability to tell stories, but also influence, the ability to let our original ideas shape our work, and collaboration with each other, our ability to question the answers and not just accept them. But AI surely has a role to play here. You see, it's not really a zero-sum game. The future of qualitative research lies in combining the best of AI and HI and not in choosing between them. And this is not an easy task. It takes trial and error, but our efforts are starting to pay off. And this is when it becomes increasingly relevant to consider the impact of, for instance, co-moderator bots and the new opportunities that this method offers. Because in a way, we can say that it can augment qualitative research, but it can also at the same time pave the way for new types of research projects that would not be considered before. And Ajay, could you please enlighten us further here?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marcus. Well, a technology that has had a huge impact on the market research world and has got clients and researchers quite excited is AI moderation. Now, at Ipsos, AI moderation allows you to conduct multiple interviews simultaneously to decode the why behind the actual consumer behavior and accelerates everything from foundational discoveries to agile gut checks, with which helps with immediate decision making. Over the last couple of years, what we have been doing is a fair bit of research on research to try to get an understanding of what are the advantages that AI brings to the table. Where does it fall short? And you'll see that some of these research and research point of views have been captured in the white papers that we've published and the industry forums that we've spoken of. These papers not just talk about the role of AI, but they also build a case that human empathy is irreplaceable. Now, AI does have a set of advantages. It does have a set of positives. As a moderator, if you were to engage AI to moderate a set of interviews for you, you'll see that there's a fair degree of engagement that tends to happen with the respondent, especially when you're looking at something like a community. The respondent feels acknowledged, they feel heard, they feel, you're actually paying attention to what I'm saying. But because for everything that I post, for everything that I say, there's often a reaction to it. So it's better than unmoderated for sure. What it also gives you is always on access. Imagine a scenario where you're trying to understand pain. You want to speak to a set of individuals who are suffering from migraines. And unfortunately, your respondent is suffering from a migraine at 3 a.m. in the morning. There is no moderator available. Who do they talk to then? A AI moderator can help you to fill that gap as well. It gives you amazing speed. You could do multiple concurrent interviews at the same time. And more so, it's conversant in 40 plus languages. So you can chat with a respondent in a language that is most familiar to them. But AI is not perfect. It has its drawbacks as well. And this is where our human moderator stars shine much brighter. Where AI lacks is real-time improvisation and exploration. This is needed when you're looking at a study around discovery, where you don't quite know what question to answer, and many a times the follow-up question depends on the answer that the respondent is given. There also could be a gap in terms of context and expertise. A AI moderator, which is powered by a large language model, may not have the same degree of understanding of your business, of your consumer, of their context. And a interpretation of what the consumer has said and why this is important to your business needs to be added in. But most importantly, where AI moderators lack is the ability to build rapport with the respondent. It's they don't have currently the ability to understand body language, subtleties of facial expression. They can't pick up say-do gaps just as yet. And that's where we think a good way of using this technology, of thinking about this technology, is where humans lead and AI amplifies their ability to gather insight. So we at Ipsos believe that AI acts as a co-moderator to your human moderator, not as a replacement to them. Our research on research has shown that you can get quite mediocre or bland insights if you don't have an expert queuing up and designing that particular study for you. This is where we fuse multi-agent systems with the expertise of 1,200 qualitative experts around the world to add subject mastery, cultural context, the client reality, and our very own proprietary frameworks and IP. As a result, you get speed, scale, but without the sacrifice of depth or trust. This is where we want to try to bring together multiple types of interaction techniques in a singular study. Think of it where, perhaps as an example, the human moderator starts off with the exploration process. This is where you are at a stage where you don't quite know what question to ask itself. where every successive interview helps you to formulate your set of hypotheses, to help you to figure out what to ask and dig deeper. You can then follow up with some AI co-moderated interviews or AI moderated interviews where AI plays the role of a co-moderator, and perhaps bookend the process with a human moderation again to tackle any of the questions that haven't been answered. So you're putting together various techniques in tandem so that you can look at speed, scale, depth without compromising trust. Now, what exactly does this do for you? The platforms work in such a manner where they automatically transcribe and translate all interactions instantly, allowing the researcher to query the data for insights and link those findings back to actual quotes and videos so that you can go back to stakeholders with a sense of conviction. Because it's linked back to videos and quotes, you know where you are experiencing a hallucination and where you are therefore omitting them completely. You're able to get greater conviction. The fact that we are able to do this in multiple countries um, uh, at a fraction of the cost of replicating the same across the various countries means that you have great speed and scale as well. But what this allows you is actual intelligent exploration by writing out the right hypothesis, asking the right question, providing the AI with the context and expertise to interrogate the answers. Now, you could do this by looking at various types of ways to get in touch with respondents as well. So part of our plethora of offers is where you can access respondents using our own panels, which is the ISA panel, or a set of vetted online panel provider partners that we have, which could be specialized panels for UX or for teens or for young mums, etc. You could also tap into syndicated communities for the data, and we have syndicated communities running in 22 markets, as well as build custom panels. So wherever you have a set of custom panels, you could use an AI moderator to get in touch with those respondents, those customers that sit on your custom panels, especially when it comes to things such as complex mission-based activities as such. Let's take a look at a set of frequent flyers. How do we get in touch with them? But at Ipsos, we believe that real insight comes not from asking the question, but from questioning the answers. This is what we've tried to do as we put together a framework to get the AI moderator to perform better. So let me try to explain that with this schematic. A human researcher writes out the interview script. Um, the AI platform, the AI moderator is able to ask the question to the respondent. The respondent provides an answer. The AI moderator then uses the answer, references it against their training, so it has a reflection model. It references against its memory, so it's able to take a look at what was said prior and post. And it uses the language capabilities to ask follow-up questions based on in a language that the respondent is most familiar and comfortable with. This process of asking a follow-up question is usually where the insight lies, not just in asking the question, but in asking a follow-up, what we refer to as questioning the answers. To do this, we did a side-by-side experiment. We took a look at a native AI moderator, and in a second group with a matched sample, we had a moderator bot, which we had tweaked with our own IP. This study was done in Spain, Portugal, and Netherlands. It was a self-funded study, and the objective was to try to understand repair or replacement behavior around electronics. So the number of questions was exactly the same. The research objectives was exactly the same. The guardrails that we provided, it was exactly the same. The difference was the tuning that we did. To that, we added a little bit of information around the category and the background and what was happening in Europe at that point in time. We added our frameworks like the Ipsos emotion framework. So the bot was able to detect and ask relevant follow-ups based on the emotion that the individual was displaying. We could tune it with adding our IP around uh, uh, understanding motivators and barriers to specific behavior, as well as allowing it to be a little more empathetic. So changing its personality a little so that it is a little more empathetic and tuning it with the best practices that one would have to be a good moderator. This is what allowed us to dig deeper. But what exactly did we find? What we found is that as you look at this particular data, you'll start to see three bar charts on your right-hand side. The first bar chart represents the first condition, the second condition, and the third is where we had a human moderated sample to use as our benchmark. We saw that by adding the Ipsos IP to the moderator, we could uncover more amount of functional and emotional themes without the training. It was closer to what the human was able to detect, what the gold standard was able to detect as well. What we also did is took a look at these particular transcripts from each of these exercises, blinded them, and shared them with a set of moderators from the three countries, Spain, Portugal, and Netherlands. The moderators were asked to provide their assessment of how each of the three conditions performed in terms of just moderation ability. This is typically a template that we would use to evaluate novice moderators. So when we're training our own teams. And so the experts who were evaluating them did not know which condition each of these uh, uh, transcripts came from. In fact, they didn't even know if it was a bot or if it was a human that was moderating. And what we started to see is that the second condition was closer to what the human was able to achieve. Now, in this case, I'd be very, I do not want to leave you with a erroneous belief that using a moderator bot is brilliant and is just as good as a human. No, that's not the case. Your human moderator is still the gold standard. But what the bot is able to do with the tuning is get closer to the gold standard. It does have certain advantages, and in other areas, the human shines much brighter. And this is where you need to take a call in terms of what's the right methodology for you. We'd like to share our point of view. Our point of view is that a human moderator helps in multiple aspects, not just in terms of designing the study, but also the discussion and helping with the decision. The human moderator is able to then take a look at what are the aspects that you should keep in mind when you're designing the study. Where do you need depth? Where do you need to have cultural nuance put in? Where do I need to add a particular technique versus the other? Simple things like just adding a projective technique as opposed to a direct question gives you about 1.3x to 1.5x more volume of data itself, just in terms of the words that are used in the primary question itself is much more robust. But what the human can also do is, because they understand your business, they're able to use this data, use it as a fuel for strategic storytelling to make sure that you're activating the insights that you've collected and taking better decisions. So I'm sure you're keen to understand a set of use cases. When do I use one? When do I use the other? Here is our point of view on the same. When you are taking a look at a situation where you have a good understanding of the issues at hand, where the research objective is quite tactical in nature, where it's quite evaluative, where you have a tightly defined brief and a tightly defined set of questions, a AI moderator by itself perhaps does quite well. When there's emphasis on speed, scale, budgets, and that's where an AI moderator performs well. It also has a certain advantage of leveraging anonymity. If the topic is perhaps a little sensitive, the respondent could feel a little threatened, it could impact their sense of self presentation. That's where a moderator bot performs quite well because you are leveraging the advantage of anonymity. It's like walking into a confession room with a priest. If I don't see them, I can verbalize what I've done. I can admit to my sins. But if I have someone sitting in front of me, I spend a lot of time thinking about, I wonder how I'm going to be perceived. That's one advantage of leveraging anonymity. Where your length of interview is somewhere between the range of 25 to 35 minutes, and your incidence rate is about 15 plus, that's when you can leverage a AI moderator. But in other cases where your objective is quite strategic in nature, where you're dealing with a lot of unknowns, where you're looking at tweaking your discussion guide, your line of questioning for post each interaction, that's where you need a human moderated set of interviews, where you're trying to understand the lived experience of someone, the symbolic meaning behind something, the say do gaps that exist, where your stakeholders are looking to walk in the consumer shoes and feel a sense of empathy. That's where it's better to have a human moderator. It also works for better for lower incidence categories. But there's a fair bit of overlap. Talking about this as a one or the other is often a false dilemma, because a dilemma typically is a forced choice between two equally good or equally bad options. And in this case, our submission is perhaps you don't need to make that forced choice. There's a large overlap where you can look at combining the two, what we refer to as qual fusion, where you can have the scale without sacrificing the depth, and the best of both worlds, where you can start off with the AI or end with it to bookend the process. Now, we've used this in quite a few use cases, from looking at user research, UX testing, stimulus testing, pack testing, etc. Post-use tests as well, where a individual has been asked to try out a particular product, and then we elicit responses to that and conduct a set of why dives post a quant. You could also use these as a set of diary studies, perhaps a set of missions that you're sending out your respondent to do. Go to a pub, order your favorite beverage, and tell me what that experience was. Or go to the closest grocery store and pick out my favorite set of cheese and tell me what that was. Or even deprivation studies, where you're speaking into the bot, having a conversation with the AI moderator, and it can ask you relevant questions. More importantly, you could even combine it with uh, other human-led interactions to create a hybrid where you're trying to understand needs and need gaps. So evaluative use cases all the way to discovery-oriented use cases. Let me share with you a little more detail. So in one of our Latin American markets, we had the opportunity to speak to a set of individuals who were trying to understand buying behavior for a set of vehicles. There we did close to about 640 interviews with a AI moderator and about 50 interviews with a human. Let's talk about understanding the future of cooking. how can we try to figure out what young audiences are feeling with regards to the meals that they're preparing? This is a case where we again looked at a rather robust set of interviews, almost 600 of them, to speak with young audiences to try to understand what they were cooking, how they felt about it. They shared with us images of the meals that they were preparing, the ingredients that they were using, and the journey that they were going through. Not something that we would have been able to do purely if we had looked at just a human moderated sample. It would not have been feasible. Or the fact that we could give a individual a mission. Go to your favorite pub and order a beverage. This is a study that we did in the US with 60 on-premise interviews, as well as 10 human-led interviews as such. And we identified multiple occasion archetypes and could provide the audience with the clients with a clear understanding of where they were doing well and perhaps where they needed to perform a little bit better in their on-premise activation. An interesting study that's close to my heart is uncovering the meaning of modern masculinity. This is a study that we did in Asia, in India, Japan, and China. We looked at a hybrid design where we combined a set of desk research, expert interviews, online communities, as well as AI moderated interactions with men and women as such. And we realized that we could hear voices of men talking about the degree of vulnerability that they feel in the current environment, where there's a mismatch between what they think is expected of them and what society will reward them with. Some of the conversations were fairly emotional. Some of them used quite rich metaphors to describe their sense of helplessness. And perhaps that would not have emerged if we were to have another human moderator being present there. Because it would be very difficult for an individual to admit to another human that they're quite confused. They don't quite know what's happening. This would hurt their sense of self-projection. So what are we planning to add further? Well, we're looking to add more vision AI capabilities to the AI moderator. This is where it would soon be able to take a look at facial expressions and ask relevant follow-up questions based on those facial expressions. You seem like this is something that you like. You seem to be smiling. Tell me more about that. Or physical intelligence itself. This is where it would have the ability to take a look at the photographs or that you upload or share off your pantry, and it would be able to ask relevant questions there, as well as recognize click paths on your website or mobile device or apps. I'm sure you're keen to take a look at what this looks like and what this feels like, and we'd be happy to share you a very short snippet. But do get in touch with us, do get in touch with Marcus, and we'd be happy to have a conversation about how this could be used for you.
Welcome to the future of market research with Ipsos's revolutionary AI moderator platform. Start with creating a new project. A single project can house multiple studies. You can choose a standard AI interview or a usability test. There are 4 methods of conversation: text interview, voice response, video response, or even a voice-to-voice interview. Set up your interview guide by describing the research objectives, or upload the interview guide that you have written in MS Word. Start from scratch on the platform, or use one of our pre-existing templates.
Let me demonstrate.
Yeah, and as you can see, it's pretty intuitive and a flexible approach, and we have a longer video, but for the sake of time in this webinar, we'll not show the entirety of it, but we will be able to share it afterwards if it's something you would like to see. So thank you so much, Ajay, for talking you through all of these things. It's really amazing work that we are doing here, and thank you so much for enlightening us further on some of these things. And And do get in touch with us if you think that some of this is relevant for you. We are, of course, happy to help. To end things off, before we take questions, I would just like to sum up 3 key takeaways that I hope you will take with you after today. And the first there is that true insight comes from questioning the answers. So we must expect the unexpected, as you also said, RJ, remain curious, because this is really what you need to find new sources of innovation and market relevance to give you that creative fuel that can set you apart and give your brand the edge. We must also make sure that we augment the power of qualitative insight and not dilute it. AI alone, as our research shows, tend to rub off the important edges and give us more linear outputs that lack counterintuitive elements of real life. So in a way, we must remain critical, not to slow down AI adoption, but to reinforce the need for original input and ideas and influence that comes from our unique experiences as human beings. And this is why we continuously explore the combination of AI and human-to-human practice to truly augment and amplify and not dilute the magic of deeper insight. And the third is to stay curious, because as you've seen today, we are super curious in this area, and we are doing a lot to innovate. And we must remember that all questions require different approaches. Just like you showed us here, RJ, with the example of masculinity, the ability to explore how we use so many different types of methods to get to those real deep and magical insights. That's that kind of curiosity that we need to have. So how we balance this AI moderation is largely depending on the questions and how explorative we need to be. So please reach out to us if you want to learn more. I'm sure we can help you find your edge as well. So let's take some time for questions here.
So we have a couple of questions that are already in, and Marcus, I'm going to need your help to read them as well. But let me just take a look at some of the ones that I can have here on the system. So the first one was, in the research on research that we did we actually do some sort of an assessment with consumers as well, and how did they feel about it? Well, yes, actually we did. It's a really interesting set of interactions that we had with consumers, because we did the test in multiple countries before we did the one in Spain, Netherlands, and Poland. I recall this particular interaction, which was set up where we bring in the respondent onto the platform, have a conversation with them, and then follow up with a human moderator probing on what their experience was like. Our hypothesis there was that perhaps the respondent would feel like this is not necessarily an interview that I would typically enjoy doing. Perhaps I'm a little hesitant speaking to a bot. On the contrary, I remember this conversation really clearly, because the individual who was taking the interview from his car talked about the fact that, hey, I've actually done multiple interactions with a bot every time I call my bank. And this seemed so much more human. This seemed so much more conversational. If I could share a personal story as well, whilst we were working on the technology, doing our various pilots, I remember programming a bot and talking to it about content that I enjoy watching on Netflix and other such streaming programs. On that day, I had programmed it to ask me questions about how I feel about my favorite program. And then I started to respond. My favorite program, obviously, for anyone who knows me, is Star Trek and Star Wars. I'm an absolute Trekkie. And so I started to narrate to it what Star Trek meant to me and how I loved content that was sort of not dystopian. It was optimistic in nature. And I started to reflect on, well, there was this one particular episode that I saw when I was a kid, and it had a bad Spock and a good Spock. I can't remember what that was. And I started to go off onto this wonderful conversation, forgetting that I was speaking to a bot, right? What was even more interesting for me is the fact that the AI moderator could respond saying, the actual show that you were talking about, the episode that you were talking about was called Mirror Mirror and not Mirror Worlds, which is what I thought it would. But those sort of conversations left me with a smile on my face because I felt like, hey, I've been acknowledged, you get me, right? What large language models can do in this case is look at a large amount of general information, which they can sort of use to create relevant follow-ups, but they don't have all the information with regards to your specific category, your specific consumer. That's where sometimes the human feels, I've responded to this already. Why are you asking me a follow-up? So it has its positives. It has its drawbacks as well.
Thank you so much, RJ. Let me see, what else do we have here? I have a hard time reading the questions. Could you take one again?
So there's another question which says, from what I've seen, AI moderators are generally much preferred compared to traditional surveys from a respondent perspective, but they're generally less preferred than a respondent talking to a human being. What is going to bridge that gap and make even AI moderators even more compelling and more likely to be embraced by respondents? That's actually a wonderful question. One of the things that we've sort of noticed when we speak to consumers about their experience is that they've noticed that if you have a very long interview, if your interview goes on for like 45 minutes or so, they tend to drop off quite sharply. So in those cases, you'll see that that it's difficult to hold the attention of the respondent for an extended period of time. You have to, in the process, ensure that you're adding in techniques and tools to make sure that that conversation is interesting and rewarding for them. The AI moderator is not as good as a human moderator. It's always better to speak to an actual human. It's always better to be face to face with that individual. The AI moderator is perhaps a solution when you're looking at scale, which is why we do not recommend replacing all your in-depth interviews and your ethnographies, etc., with AI moderation. It doesn't solve all tasks. It doesn't answer all questions, but it has a role. It has a role where you're looking to amplify the abilities of your human moderator and reach a larger scale without necessarily breaking the bank.
Yeah. And in connection to that, I actually see another question here that says, I see a lot of these scalar benefits where a qualitative study moves from having 10 to 15 to all of a sudden, just because it's simple to include, just because it's possible to include 60 or 600 respondents using a qualitative methodology. But more is not always, but more is not always more. You often learn enough from speaking to 10 or 15 people. What is your perspective on this change and challenge? And well, this is actually true for me, because this was also one of the first questions I had upon seeing this solution, thinking that we often see that, and we often recommend that, having 10 as part of a target group that represents a segment, that's good because you start to feel data saturation. So again, as RJ said, it's not because this is a good thing to do in all types of research. But if you think about the one you had before about the cooking experiments, if you think that about you're having a very simple task to document from, having a large-scale sample can actually help us derive bottom-up themes based on all the qualitative input. So it actually becomes kind of like a quantitative scale, but with the ability to go out and trace back where these themes are emerging in true qualitative examples. So again, it's not because it's suitable to have 60 or 600 in all types of research, But let's say you narrow down to a very specific task-driven question where you need bottom-up generation of themes and the traceability and context that comes with it, then it can be a good suggestion to have these as well. Because we are also doing Modbot studies where it is indeed 10 or 15 as you would have in a normal sample, because we have larger survey and interview lengths, for instance. So it's not really either or, but it's about adapting to the questions at hand. And indeed, it is definitely not a black and white way of doing it.
Exactly. If I could just build on that, it comes down to, this is where you need the expertise of the human moderator to design the right study for you. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? And it depends on the nature of the data that you're seeking. So for example, if you're looking to try to understand breakfast consumption habits as such, and if you have a open-ended in there, you'll collect a limited number of responses. One of the studies that we did, our quant colleagues did, realized that you could get 10x the amount of number of foods that the individuals were consuming for breakfast. And then you could then group them, as opposed to say 19 options versus 203 options as such. So what the platform allows you to do is not just collect the data, but also make sense of it and see where and how you can tend to use this data a little more in a manner which is perhaps a little more useful to answering your business needs.
And I think we have maybe just time for one more question. Ajay, could you please help me read out loud? I think it seems to be so far away from them here.
Okay, let me just take a look at that. With such big data samples of 600 interviews, are you also able to use AI for pattern recognition? And does that not enhance the risk of losing even more nuance? So yes, what the AI is able to do is look at patterns, but you could also, with such a large sample of 600, you could also blur the lines between quant and qual. So you're starting to see within the same interaction, collecting information on a scale that gives you that power, but also breaking that 600 into smaller subsegments and subclusters, so you can take a look at that information in a meaningful manner. So the 600 was chosen because it had a few to represent different vehicle types, different journeys, etc., etc. And so you're predefining the cuts that you would have when you're looking at that data. So you can then start to see differences between demographics, between vehicle types, between different points in time of the journey. However, if you look at it holistically without intelligently interrogating the data, you run the risk of bland, heard it before, right? So the AI itself, our experience also has been that if you're the more data that you're providing, it doesn't necessarily mean better. You have to have an analysis plan in mind when you're getting into it, just like you would when you're conducting your quantitative studies. How am I going to cut this data rather than let's just figure it out when it all comes in? It's a different set of skills that are required.
Yeah. And one thing in this connection also, just as a last point maybe, is that the scale is not something that has to be predefined from the start. So let's imagine that we sit with a tight research budget and maybe also a tight timeline, and we only have the ability to make research in one market, even though we know that our stakeholders would want insights from 4 markets. Then let's say that you prioritize the human effort, make 10 to 15 interviews in one market, you deliver the insight, and then, oh, this is really, really interesting. I wish we could do this for this market and that market. Then you can take those true qualitative learnings you got from the human moderated phase and maybe take out 10 key things that you need to address in your other priority markets, and then scale it up and save time and cost because you already did the hard qualitative work, and now you can do a cultural check in other markets. So it's not something that you have to know from the get-go. It really, that's what I meant with paving the way for new types of research that you might not consider before due to this flexibility and the option of scale, not that you are forced to have the scale. Yeah, I think that there are some other questions in here, and I think some of them we'll be able to get back to afterwards as well. But I think that we're about to round off for today. So thank you so much for listening in. Thank you so much for all the good questions here. And I'll just let you know that after today, you will also receive the presentation deck automatically, so you don't have to request it afterwards. We'll be sure to send it. And again, we are super curious in this space, and we are doing a lot of efforts, and of course want to share that with you. So do reach out, and let's see what we can do together. Thank you so much for taking time, and have a nice day.
Take care.